Mirrors and patterns. In this video, we'll create a body mirror, a feature mirror, a face pattern, and a component pattern. In Fusion 360, we want to get started with the supplied dataset, pipe pattern. With pipe pattern, you'll notice that there are several components as well as bodies in this design. We have a pipe cap, we have a pipe extension, we have a couple McMaster-Carr hardware, in this case a bolt and a nut, and then we have a manifold. We're going to be taking a look at various ways to mirror and pattern bodies, components, and faces using this as our example. To get started, I first want to take a look at the pipe extension. So I'm going to activate this component, expand it, and note that this has a single body. What we want to do first is we want to take a look at creating a mirror of a body. When we go to the Create menu, we want to navigate down to Mirror, and note that it's set to bodies, but we can use this for faces, bodies, features, or components. We're going to be mirroring this entire body, and the mirror plane that we're going to be using is the back face. When we do this, we have the option to join or create a new body. We're going to be joining these together, creating a single solid body of the pipe. This pipe component now is still a single body, but it has the extension that goes on the other side of it, and because we used a mirror, we were able to join it. We could also take this and we could create a pattern of it, putting it in each of the following positions. So in order to do that, we would want to go to the rectangular pattern. Instead of using faces, we can select bodies, which will create multiple bodies inside of this component, or we can create individual components. In this case, I want to pattern the component. The component will be the pipe extension. For our direction, we're going to be using the default X direction, and then we can simply begin dragging this out. In this case, we're going to be going a total distance of minus 1,000 millimeters. We can define this as the entire extent, or we can do it as the distance between each. When we do it as the distance between each, that'll be minus 500 millimeters. Once we say OK, note that we now have pipe extension with the colon 2 and 3 after it. That's because these are identical copies. Any change that's made to the original will also modify each of these copies. Let's activate the top level and let's take a look at some other options we have when creating mirrors and patterns. Next, I want to focus on this pipe cap. This is currently a body. And what I want to do first is I want to hide my pipe extension as well as the hardware that's on this body. I want to focus my attention on creating a pattern of this specific geometry so I can add hardware around the entire part. We're going to start by taking a look at Create, Pattern, and we want to use a circular pattern. Because we don't necessarily know the feature that was used to create this, we can use the Faces option. By using faces, we can select the fillet, the circular section, the chamfer, and the inside. When we do this, we then need to select the axis of revolution, and I'm going to grab the outside of the part, and I'm going to increase the number of instances to 10 and say OK. When I do this, all 10 instances have been created. However, if we view this from a back view, you'll note that the holes didn't go all the way through. There are a couple ways that we can deal with this. We can create a sketch to extrude all the way through. We can go back and we can find the feature that was used to remove that hole, and we can pattern that feature. We can do this by simply selecting it and finding it inside of the timeline. We can also create a pattern of faces, or we can use things like direct modeling tools such as delete. If I take that original feature and I go to Create, Pattern, and Circular Pattern, now the type is automatically set to features because it was pre-selected. If I select the same axis of revolution and the same number 10, and I say OK, now we were able to remove all of those holes quickly and easily. Sometimes if you don't have that feature available to you, you might need to use other tools like direct modeling tools. But in this instance, we had it available and we could easily add it. Now let's bring back the hardware and the pipe extension. The hardware is comprised of two components, a bolt and a nut. I'm going to pre-select both of those, and I'm going to select the option to create a circular pattern. The component type is automatically pre-selected, as are both of the objects. We simply need to select the axis of revolution and the number of instances. Once we've created those instances, you'll notice that in the browser, we have a colon after each one and the number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, all the way up through 10. That means that any changes made to the original are going to propagate to all of these other instances since they're exact copies. When we use functionality like mirror, we need to be careful because that doesn't necessarily have the same option. So let's take a look at how we can create a mirror of these components. The first thing we need is a plane in the middle so that way we can mirror it to the other position. I'm going to go to Construct and select Midplane, and I'm simply going to select the inside faces of my pipe flange, as that'll give me a midplane directly in the center. I'm going to say OK, and I want to take a look at just creating a mirror of the original bolt and nut. When I go to Create, and I select Mirror, it's automatically set to Components. I can select my plane, and noting that it's putting it on the opposite side. Once we say OK, note that inside of the browser, we now have restarted that count after the colon. They also have mirror in the name. That's because these mirrored components are not going to be the same as the original components. Downstream, this is problematic if you're keeping track of these items in, say, a bill of materials. That parts list or bill of materials is not going to include the correct number of these items because this mirror no longer follows that same suit. What you would want to do instead is create a copy of these and not a mirror or opposite version. I'm going to take the mirror in the timeline and I'm going to select Delete on the keyboard to get rid of it. And then we could take an option such as Move Copy. We could set the Move Copy to Components. We could select our hardware. In this case, we want just the bolt and the nut. We want to select Create Copy, and then we can drag it to its new position. Once we say OK, note that inside of the browser, we have 11. So that's an important distinction to keep track of whenever you're creating assemblies of components, especially when things like hardware are involved or exact copies of specific components like this pipe. If we wanted to create a linear pattern of these, we could take each of these and we could create a linear pattern just like we did with the original pipe. That would create another instance of this that would fall in line with the same part number. So keeping those nuances in check is important downstream, especially when we start to create detailed drawings. Now let's take a look at the end of this manifold. It's open on the right side, but we have a cap on the left side. Let's go back to a home view and let's focus just on the manifold. I'm going to right click on it and isolate it. I'm also going to activate it so that way I'm working just on the manifold. From here, I want to take a look at creating a mirror of some geometry. Because the mirror in this case is going to apply to the same body, I don't have to worry about the issue of creating another instance or a copy of a component. In this case, we simply want to select the inside and outside faces of that cylinder, and then we want to select our mirror plane, and then we'll say OK. Notice when we do this, the geometry fails. It wasn't able to create that mirror. Now this is because in this case, it's still missing some geometry. We tried to mirror it as a face, and in some cases that works fine, in other cases it won't. In this case, however, we could take the feature, the revolve, and we could create a mirror of that feature. Once again, we'll select the mirror plane. The compute option in this case will allow it to adjust based on its surrounding geometry, and then it should be able to create the mirror and combine it with the rest of the geometry. Let's do a quick check by going to Inspect and creating a section analysis and simply dragging a plane back through to make sure that the manifold does look correct. We expand this, we should note that we still have a single solid body. So this means that the mirror of that feature is exactly what worked in this case. I'm going to hide the analysis. I'm going to right click at the top level and unisolate all, navigate back to the home position, activate the top level, and then make sure that I save this design before moving on.